So let's discuss how government lies to us about how they squander our tax dollars. A recent Washington State story about how 460 million tax dollars, yours and mine, were illegally wasted is really just another recent example. So let's dig into the details here. A recent report from Jason Rantz, who's Washington State's own KTTH 770 AM radio host. This actually was covered by national media just in the last few days, and it exposes how $460 million of your taxpayer dollars, yours and mine, were squandered and diverted from COVID-19 relief funds to help give cash to illegal immigrants, rather than actually used to help with struggling citizens or local businesses who were suffering under Governor Inslee's excessively harsh and abusive lockdown regime. Now, I've linked to Jason's original story down below and some additional follow-up articles as well and additional media coverage so that if you go in the video description, you can learn more about that there. But let's remember, it was only a few years ago that Washington State Governor Inslee, in coordination, very close coordination with Attorney General Bob Ferguson, that they decided to take draconian, selectively targeted, and highly abusive lockdown strategies to harm small local businesses throughout Washington State, while at the same time, of course, protecting the politicians' big box, retailer friends, and campaign contributors. I mean, Inslee and Ferguson used the COVID-19 excuse, of course, and they maintained their abusive and harsh strategies months and even years after it was very clearly apparent to every sane person that these policies were disproportionate and definitely unnecessary. Now, remember, if you can, like Mossy Rocks, Spiffy's, the Farm Boy Restaurant, and Stuffy's, that one place out on the peninsula, among many, many other places. These guys were targeted by Washington State's Attorney General Bob Ferguson, and he would spare no expense or taxpayer-funded resource in his just eternal quest to destroy local families and businesses, particularly if they didn't vote for him. At exactly the same time that Ferguson was working overtime to kind of help dump violent sex predators in neighborhoods near schools and children. And so presumably Ferguson has locked up the violent sex predator vote at this point in time now. But one issue that we have to remember is that during these years, not that long ago, there's a fact that our government claimed that they were actually just tossing pallet loads of cash out of helicopters for COVID relief to help citizens deal with the trauma and drama of the pandemic, of just these insane, destructive government policies. But now, unsurprisingly, it appears that at least 460 million of those dollars were actually diverted away from local businesses and citizens and instead, of course, used to subsidize illegal immigrants who were basically located here instead. Now, please keep in mind that this is in addition to the $600+ million that was just lost, just wasted by our state's Employment Security Department, supposedly to Nigerian prince fraudsters. And really, you don't forget that this is in addition to the regular loss and fraud and incompetence and waste that really occurs every day that our overpaid and undersupervised bureaucrats bother to show up or even zoom into work for a few hours. I mean, they didn't just wake up and learn how to divert, steal, and waste your tax dollars one day. They actually do this every day, just as part of their regular on-the-job work experience. But the COVID-19 lockdown world drama kind of gave them this special opportunity, a really once-in-a-bureaucrat and politician's lifetime opportunity into basically how to create indentured future generations, basically take future generations and make them indentured for extra bonus trillions of dollars. And this functioned as a kind of turbocharged opportunity to divert cash away from the people that they pretended and claimed that they would help. Now, listen, I'm glad that this story has been making the rounds recently, and Jason clearly deserves the kudos that he's getting for exposing this story and helping it kind of get national attention. But this is most likely just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, in this case, one of the reasons why everyone in government, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the grifters, the reason that they fight against transparency and openness is that if you bother to pay attention to how these guys abuse and waste your tax dollars, you just can't be happy with what you're going to discover. Unless, of course, you are milking it for yourself and collecting fat stacks of taxpayer cash based on basically some scam that you're running in collusion with your best friends in government. Really, part of the reason why I believe that the average person is rapidly losing trust in government is because the more they learn about government, the worse it gets. You can only be happy with how the average government crew operates if you either don't know anything about them or if you're part of the grifting operation making bank on the corruption or incompetence yourself. So if you find out you're getting educated, even slightly educated, about just how government operates, you quickly realize that your tax dollars are usually diverted, squandered, and wasted way too often. So when you, the newly awakened citizen, realize this ugly fact, you essentially have two choices. First, you can get angry and decide maybe some real change is necessary with how government operates. Those who tend to react this way are probably the people who watch this channel maybe right now. However, it's important to realize that that isn't really how everybody responds. Some people, they hear stories like this and they actually get jealous. And, they actually want this cash. I mean, after all, no fair. I want some of it for myself. That's what they say. So how do I get on the gravy train? People who respond like that just want their cut of the cash flow, and they probably vote for Democrats to give them a better chance to get in on the action next time. Now, really, this is a bigger story than just another $500 million diverted away from citizens who are harmed by government's destructive, harmful, lockdown world policies. I mean, let's face it, government in many forms and using many excuses will create an expensive problem, and then government will turn right around and squander even more taxpayer dollars to fix or mitigate the very problem that they created in the first place. Often, as in this example, they'll continue to make the problem worse while simultaneously squandering even more cash to mitigate for the damage that they're actively causing. I mean, after all, nobody in this decision process considers the money their money, right? It's always other people's money, taxpayers' money, or based on the massive escalating federal debt, it's your grandkids' cash that they'll have to pay with interest long after the decision makers and the beneficiaries are long gone. There are actually two major problems, I believe, that were exposed with the story that I want to address, because obviously the story actually helps expose many problems, and then I think most people are just going to focus on the diversion of tax dollars to subsidize illegal immigration. And so I feel like that story is probably going to get a lot of coverage, which is obvious, and it deserves all the coverage that this aspect of the story gets. But let me address just two distinct aspects of the story that I think really help explain why so many people properly distrust government at almost every level, and why this type of behavior is clearly unsustainable. Now, first, what we have seen over the past few decades of watching our government is that almost every program, grant, tax, bill, or piece of legislation is drafted initially really as a lie. It's sold to you and I, and in some cases, even the politicians involved in the drafting of the policy or the legislation. It's actually sold to us as a fund that helps, in this example, businesses who suffered from Inslee's lockdown world. Here, free federal cash that we borrowed from China to pay for our insane lockdown policies. Be quiet, you lowly serf, let government buy your silence, and then mitigate the harm that government's actually inflicting on you at the same time. And then, of course, years later, you find out, sure, they did toss a few pennies to a few favored businesses in the community, just enough maybe to keep them silent and accepting their fate. However, large sums of this cash were actually diverted into fraud, scams, or programs that had nothing to do with whatever fake promises the politicians were making when they wrote or passed the original legislation. So it really doesn't matter what the bill says, what empty promises are made, or what the intention of the bill might originally have been in the first place. It simply becomes an excuse, kind of a blank canvas or a conduit for diverting cash into whatever special interest group that the bureaucrats, the campaign donors, or the political insiders, whichever ones they wanted in the first place. It's always about the money. They want to grab the cash, divert it to their friends, and make sure that it vanishes with no accountability. Our political class does this every day in D.C. They do this every day in Olympia, where I live in Washington State, and in your state capital as well. I mean, I really don't care which state you live in. Clearly, they do this on a bigger scale and more openly. Places like New York and Illinois and California, of course, but don't think that Texas, Nebraska, Idaho, or North Dakota is immune. The same thing usually with maybe less obvious flagrancy and flamboyancy. That happens there as well. Our political class even does this at the city, county, and the school board level, and smaller scale. Every day, all the time, constantly, just rinse, wash, repeat. And I believe it is just automatic for most government bureaucrats and agencies today. Most of them have been doing this for so long, I think, that they're unaware that there's anything wrong in doing it in the first place. But average people, the taxpayers, the governed, maybe people who haven't been paying that close attention before, these people, well, people like this, they know that these outcomes and these results are definitely wrong. So this is essentially exposes the next part of the problem that I think this story should cover. There's no accountability, just none. There's no matter how bad it gets, nobody's ever really held accountable in these cases. There's just no institutional fix for this. The court system won't fix it. Maybe someday down the road, but unlikely. Law enforcement, really at any level, is not going to fix it and probably couldn't do it even if you wanted law enforcement to do so. I mean, at best, we can merely expose the truth if we are fortunate enough to get some level of delayed insight into how the money was wasted, diverted, or squandered. I mean, we can expose it, but nobody's going to fix it. The missing funds are not coming back. Nobody's clawing back the cash, and the bureaucrats still collect their fat paychecks, no matter how badly they screw it up. And besides, the really capable bureaucrats are always able to find someone else to blame. So, what do we do? So this is how I want to end this video, kind of focused on a solution approach to resolving maybe just one part of the way that government operates today, because there's no magic solution or miracle cure. And I guarantee you that we're in for some tough times ahead. But after decades of tracking how government operates, one part of any solution for how we must address the challenges that face us, we must dramatically and significantly shrink the size of government, no matter what. Whatever the choices are, that has to be a part of it. We must decrease the size, the scope, and the invasiveness of government as we see it today. Now, this might mean something different to you than it does to your neighbor, but I suspect the size of government will be reduced no matter what. And there's no benefit in just delaying that downsizing. Government has squandered, it continues to squander, and it plans to squander our resources even more in the future. I mean, the exploding debt, the escalating taxes, and the bloated government, they're all approaching just this kind of inevitable reckoning. Either we can wait for it to collapse and have a very messy downsizing without plan or priority, or we can start the plan to downsize it now. But it is inevitable either way. And once we accept that reality, then it becomes easier for us to kind of address a solution. Now, our first step must be, I think, to recognize that the grants, the contracts, and outsourcing our government, all this damage that has been done, just like this $460 million example, all these grants must be shut off. They're not just phased out. I mean, just cut to zero. When Jason Rantz looked closer into the misuse of the $460 million of our taxpayer cash, a wide variety of nonprofits and campaign contributors, of course, were benefiting from these grants. I mean, who can verify if anyone ever received any of this cash? Because after all, the recipients, they're illegals. I mean, who actually audits this? How can you audit it? How much of these hundreds of millions of dollars was just flat out stolen or siphoned into the pockets of the groups paid directly to administer these funds? Nobody really knows. Nobody's looking, and there is no practical way to figure it out. The money's just gone, and all these groups just want more cash, more of your tax dollars. Government greed is insatiable, and the parasitical organizations that feed on this greed are absolutely not worth supporting. Now, no matter how much our bureaucracy or politicians sell these grants to us, and I mean, they're all just beautiful stories about bluebirds, butterflies, and sunshine, homeless solutions, all kinds of solutions, of course, but they're just pretty much all wasted, grifted, and lost for no benefit to anybody else except for the insiders. If we keep subsidizing and rewarding corruption, dishonesty, waste, and theft, we only get more of it. And this might be a concept difficult to grasp by a modern college grad today, but it's how the world actually works. We have to cut these grants, nearly every single one of them to zero, and keep it there forever. Now, related to this, the agencies that we're funding that supposedly administer these grants and programs are obviously just worthless, and they've been essentially captured by the system as well. Since government needs to be downsized, these agencies really are the first ones that should be cut down or eliminated at the same time. There's really no choice, and it's better to do it sooner rather than later. The nature of bureaucracy is simply to perpetuate itself. That is true. It's really truly its highest calling and the highest priority it has. And this is kind of a parasitical function that just sucks the life out of the rest of us. Now, I've often had people ask me if I would ever work for government. And mostly, actually, I laugh about that. I'm going to actually confess, though, there is one job that I would take, and only one. And let me just completely radically downsize government. I'd love to be the guy who does that. It would be a job that I could do. And then when my last task would be done, I'd get to downsize myself. And I think that that would actually be a good job and the only one I would ever do in government. Now, finally, we'll all be needing to kind of refocus our understanding on what critical functions of government really are if we downsize. I mean, let's start with the basics. And these are the parts of government where we are currently barely able to function. The legal system, law enforcement, just basic public order stuff. And this might need to be fixed in many ways, but it will be necessary to maintain some basic level of functionality in our lives. I actually don't think even that baseline of government is easy to support in today's society. But if we can just transition to supporting and strengthening a basic function of law enforcement, court systems, jails, and basic services like this, at least we would have a foundation then for moving forward. Now, I realize this may seem like pie in the sky for now, and it probably is. But we will have to start making decisions on just stark subjects like this very soon. And when you think out and kind of consider how you would rebuild honestly without the bloated, very clearly unsustainable corruption that we're witnessing all around us today, it tends to be a better plan if you kind of have a basic plan on how to get started. I mean, money isn't unlimited. Even taxpayer funds are not unlimited. The music eventually stops, and there will be few chairs left, and the party comes to an end. The hangover might be ugly, but we'll need to have a plan for how to organize differently than our current fiasco that we see unfolding all around us. The funny thing is, when I talk to bureaucrats on the inside of this drama, they all know that it's unsustainable. The honest ones are actually shocked that it's lasted this long. I'm reminded when Adam Smith once said that there is great ruin in a nation. He was right. And we're witnessing this today as our political class, bureaucrats, insiders, and others just do their best to take the taxpayer cash. Well, the getting is good, grab it now. And I'll paraphrase Margaret Thatcher here when I say, the problem is you eventually do run out of other people's money. Our nation's $34 trillion in the hole, and there's just no practical way to pay that cash back, ever. Not even our grandkids. Now, I wish I could say that we have gotten something useful out of at least the last 30 trillion of that debt, but it doesn't really look like it. And with the exponential increase in this debt and the rising interest payments and the escalation of the waste that we just see all around us today, we will hit the kind of end point, the end game. And most people watching this video will witness that end. Once the feds can't pick up the pieces or bail out the states, then the states will have to cut back, and this will ultimately trickle down to every unit of government that we have today. It doesn't matter your political affiliation, your race, or how much you wish that this wouldn't happen. It will happen regardless. But rather than just dreading that inevitability, I believe it's actually worthwhile to plan for how we start the recovery process now. Perhaps where we can have some influence, we can reduce the theft, waste, or incompetence. But it's only if we shrink the size of government and those who profit from the scenario. If it seems too big to think about at a national level, just shift your focus to the impact on your city or your county and your state. That is actually where government impacts you immediately and directly. So try to make an impact there first. That is where we all must start, and that is where we should start showing up. Because the future belongs to those who show up.